Hello friends, welcome to the 8th lecture of our course Business to Business Marketing. In the last lecture we are talking about organizational buying behavior, that is where we had started, right. So, if you look at organizations, right, and how do they purchase, because obviously there is a huge difference between the way the purchasing is done by a retail consumer and the way organizations buy, right. So, when you think about organizations like, for example, the how do the Tatas make their purchases, how does purchasing in a Bharat Forge or in a company like Hindustan Aeronautics Limited or even Bharat Electronics. So, how do these organizations make purchases, right? Is purchasing a very simple process, or it is a very complex process in the B2B firms, right? So, in the last class we also discussed about the several environmental influences which impact the buying process of for an organization, and these were like, for example, the change in political structure, the taxation, the legal challenges, ethical influences. For example, in some country the culture could be different, the definition of bribe might be different. Similarly, we talked about economic structures also. For example, one example that we gave in the last class was about the rise of the concept of GST that has started in India. Now, because of that, maybe many firms would find it little costlier, their products are becoming costlier, and this can have a bearing on the price of the product, or several other taxations that can happen, right. And we also talked about the various phases in the organizational buying behavior, like, for example, what affects the buying process, for example, the psychological world of the individuals. Now, after all, we know that it is the individuals who make a decision in any case, it is a consumer product case or a industrial product case, right, or a B2B case. So, and there the people who are involved, they are not devoid of emotions, they will be having some emotions. So, how their emotions are influencing the entire buying process. So, there we talked about the psychological world, and then we talked about the way the decision making process will be taken, joint or individual decision making process will happen, and that depends on several factors. For example, the value of the product, the kind of urgency at which they are working, and several other factors, right. And then we lastly talked about that if organizations are there and a lot of people are involved, then that also has drives to conflict. So, it raises conflict, right. And so, how do you balance this conflict in an organization, right. So, all this we had discussed, and today we will discuss about the various models of the organizational buying behavior. We will also compare against the let us say a consumer buying behavior model, end consumer or retail consumer buying behavior model versus the industrial consumers buying behavior model, right. So, as you can see, based on research, several different aspects of the psychology of the decision makers are involved in purchase decision making. Now for example, let us say I am head of an organization and I will be the final decision maker, right. In such a condition, what kind of a person I am, right? I am a very risk taking, bold person. So, the way I will take decisions will vary to another person, suppose who is more conservative, more orthodox, and he is shy to take a decision. So, there the decision making process will be entirely different, right. So, for example, look at the primary among these are the expectations that the people, the decision makers will have about the brands and the suppliers. So, if I have a very high expectation, right, about a particular supplier or a brand, then the way I will take decision, right, I will make my purchases will be different from somebody who does not have a very high opinion about a brand or a supplier, right. So, psychological influences you cannot deny, because end of the day we are all humans and we are driven by emotions, okay. So, the purchasing objectives, which is defined as buying the right items in the right quantity at the right price and the right place, for example, right time and place. So, if you look at this pictorial representations, so every the objectives of the purchasing function may vary. For example, for some organizations, delivery, faster delivery or all time availability is a very important concern. For some other organizations, the product quality is a very important concern, right. For some third organization, maybe the price, buying at a very low price or cost effective, being cost effective is maybe a purchasing objective. For some, none of these, but a 24 hours 7 365 days a year services, right. So, what kind of services you are able to provide to them, that will be the decide whether we will purchase from a particular vendor or supplier or not, right. And finally, what kind of supplier relationships somebody is managing. For example, if I am a firm who is buying a certain, let us say, lubricants or certain office supplies or something, then I would like to look at what kind of a relationship is my vendor managing with me. If the vendor is somebody who is not maintaining a good relationship, then maybe I would not like to get involved with such a supplier or a vendor, because I know that supplier relationships can be very, very helpful in developing new products, developing new services to the market, understanding, getting information about the market at a very faster pace, so that I can take accordingly the right steps. So, all these can be different purchasing objectives that the company can have. Maybe many companies might be having all of these as a purchasing objective, but it might not be possible because you can't get all of them at one time. So, generally we compromise, we make a trade off between 2 or 3 objectives, or majorly one objective, we make a trade off. Okay. So, today we will talk about the models in the industrial buying behavior. So, many models have been developed in attempting to explain the organizational buying behavior. So, the use of buyer behavior models gives those who wish to understand and affect industrial buying behavior a common and useful starting point. So, if you can understand these models, then it will become a very easy for you to understand how exactly the buying process initiates in the B2B firms, right. Okay. So, what are the different models? Now, for example, first today I will talk about a consumer behavior model also, which is popularly known as the Howard-Sheth model, right. Then we will talk about Seth's model of industrial buying behavior, right, which is that we talk about the B2B buying behavior. And then we will talk about a third model, or second from for the organizational buying behavior, the Webster and Wynn model. So, this model is a consumer buying behavior model. These two are organizational buying behavior models, right. So, we will talk about all the three. So, let us start with a simple consumer behavior model. Okay. So, this model was given by Howard and Seth, and this model specifies 5 different processes, right, which create differential expectations among the individuals involved in the purchasing process. See, a person would buy a thing, or any organization would buy a thing only when it meets their expectations, right. So, if something does not meet my expectation, I will not buy it, as good as that. So, what factors affect my expectation? Now, there can be 5 factors. The first factor is my background. So, the background of the individuals. Okay. The second factor that can influence is the information sources. So, how I am going to collect the information and what kind of a active search I am doing, that will affect my expectation. The fourth is the perceptual distortion. So, what kind of a distortion is happening in my mind, how am I perceiving about the product, what am I retaining in my brain, and what am I forgetting. So, that distortion and retention is very important. And finally, how satisfied I am with my past purchases. So, these are some points that will have a effect on my expectation as an individual. Okay. So, the Howard-Sheth model is a sophisticated integration of the various social, psychological and marketing influence on consumer choice into a coherent sequence of information processing. So, you can look at the human brain, and now you can see that this decision that is being taken out here is based on several factors, right. So, what this gentleman would expect will depend on what kind of a psychological state he is and what kind of influences he is going through, for example, the advertisements, the promotions and the design of the products, and what kind of a price is given to him, and what kind of a accessibility to the product is available to him. So, these things might influence his decision making process, right. Now, Howard-Sheth talks about three phases, for example. So, in the three levels of decision making, so the first one he talks about extensive problem solving, right, and in the second phase he talks about limited problem solving, and third phase he talks about a habitual response behavior. Now, let us understand all the three with an example. Okay. Now, first phase, at this level the consumer does not have any basic information or knowledge about the brand or the supplier. Largely this is a brand we talk about, because it is a consumer product we are talking about, and he does not have any preferences for any product. So, at this moment he is blank, he does not know anything, right. In this situation the consumer will seek information about all the different brands available, right. So, the first phase is extensive problem solving or problem searching. So, you are searching for the solving the problem, right. So, what happens in this case? You see, he needs a printer but does not know which type of printer, what price range and which company. Let us say the consumer is searching and he finds lot of, for example, he goes to a Amazon site or a Flipkart site and he checks for printers, for example. So, printer is something that he wants. Now, there are so many printers available to him with different models and different price ranges and all, right, and even the review, quality, everything is given out there. So, he makes a check at it, right, and then he comes to the second situation where it is called limited problem solving. So, what happens in this situation? Here this situation exists for consumers who have little knowledge about the market or partial knowledge about what they want to purchase. In order to arrive at a brand preference, some comparison has to be done. So, you need information for that, right. So, here it could be in the second phase, you have now come to you have seen certain products and you have jotted down maybe a few out of you have tried to mentally select a few out of the large number of available printers. Okay. So, maybe you have figured out of many 6 different printers in this case, right. So, in this phase the consumer knows that he needs a multifunction monochrome laser printer, right, ranging between 15 to 20,000 rupees, but he does not know which one he would take, a Canon or a HP or a Brother. Now, that is a model, actually, that is a So, which one will he buy? So, in this phase he is like a funnel, the information is coming down in a inverted shape. So, the filtration is happening. So, initially you had got lot, then it is limited, and here what is happening in the third phase, final phase, the habitual response behavior is coming into play. At this level the consumer knows very well about the different brands, and now he can differentiate between the different characteristics of each product, and he already decides to purchase a particular one out of it. If he looks at the last slide here and then he makes a comparison and he finally comes down to 1, let us say. So, he knows it very clearly that they need a Canon image class MF. Now, this is not a I am not speaking for the company, obviously, this is just a example for a classroom, right. So, please understand. So, looking at your budget, looking at the review, looking at the quality, looking at your objective of your need, right. So, you decide finally maybe this is one of the products which I want, right. So, these are normally the ways in which you take a decision. So, Howard-Sheth, now what I will do is we will understand how Howard-Sheth has developed a model in which he explains how consumers drive into a conclusion or they reach to a conclusion. How do they take a decision, right? So, there are several factors involved which I will be explaining. For example, you can see the inputs like the stimulus display, the perceptual constructs, the learning constructs and the output basically. So, this side, if you can see, this is the input, this is the output, and this part is where the processing is done. right, the processing in the human brain is done, right. So, what is says is input variables, hypothetical constructs, output variables and exogenous variables. Exogenous variables are those variables which might influence the process. So, in the input variables, for example, in this consumer buying behavior model, the stimulus inputs refer to the idea or information clue about the brand and its product in terms of product quality, distinctiveness, price, service and availability, for example, right. So, these are the input variables. So, these are the knowledge or information which we require about, as said right now, quality, price, etc., all these things, right. So, you have significant stimuli, symbolic stimuli and social stimuli, right. So, what exactly are we talking about? Some of them could be significant in nature, that means they are very important to you. Some are just symbolic stimuli, so that can maybe that can just influence as a as a just symbolic gesture, and some have a social influence, right. So, how do these input variables affect a consumer? That depends on these input variables, right. Then you have the hypothetical variables, the constructs that depict the central part of the model. So, the where the processing is done, right. So, it includes all those psychological variables which play a vital role in the decision making process, correct. So, there can be, as we had seen in the diagram, there can be perceptual constructs and learning constructs. So, what are the perceptual constructs? Now, the components that define the consumer's procurement and perception of the information provided at the input stage. Now, if we go back to the slide. So, what is he doing in the perceptual construct? He is going for a search, right. This is something like the stimulus ambiguity. So, some there is some which is symbolic. Now, this is something like he gets an idea from certain ads, certain promotions which he pays attention, right. So, it generates attention, right, and that then creates a bias, a perceptual bias in the consumer, right. But there are certain learning constructs also which are, for example, which help him in generating confidence and developing an attitude, his motives and builds his choice criteria. So, all these together help in defining the learning constructs, okay. And finally, these learning constructs that he gets after this perceptual constructs, so he derives these learning constructs, these help in finally the output, that is the final decision making process. So, whether what kind of a purchase he will make, what kind of a attitude he is developing for the brand, these things. So, when we talk about the learning constructs, as it is mentioned here, the learning constructs define the buyer's knowledge, opinion, attitude and the end decision on the product or brand, what he will do, whether he will buy or he will reject. So, for example, motive, what kind of choice he is making, which brand he is preferring, what is his attitude, what level of confidence he has for this particular product or brand, what is his intention, whether he will buy again or he will never buy again this product, is he satisfied or not. So, and some of these might be interconnected among them, right, themselves. So, once this learning construct part is over, then you go to the output variable where the result of the buyer's decision making can be seen in the form of his response towards the input variable. So, whatever response now he is showing in order to the response variables or the input variables, that were there, like the symbolic stimuli, significant stimuli and all. So, after that, what is he going to do after the processing has happened in the brain? What will he do now? Will he buy? Will he not buy? What will he do, right? So, this is where the output variables come to play. So, the attention, brand comprehension, attitude, intention and purchase behavior, finally whether he will make this purchase or not, right. So, these are the output variables. Now, there can be certain factors, as I had said, which are exogenous in nature. So, there are external factors which might influence the buying behavior. They are not necessarily part of the input variable, they are neither part of the processing or neither they are, but they influence the output variable which is the purchase decision. Now, what are these variables which are exogenous in nature? Now, for example, how important is the purchase, right? How important is the purchase to me? So, what is my personality class? Is my personality going to affect my purchase? What is social class, culture? what kind of organization I am in, what kind of time pressure I am dealing with, and what is my financial status. Are these things going to affect the decision making process or the final purchase behavior? So, these are called the exogenous variables, right. Okay. Now, from here we understood that this is how the consumer decision making process was happening. Now, coming to a decision making process in the organizations or industrial buying behavior model, right. So, again this model was given by Jagdish Seth, where he talked about few things, like for example, he starts with the expectations. So, what is the expectations of the people involved in the purchasing decision making process? So, first of all we will know who are the people involved in the decision making process. Now, he could be a purchasing agent, a engineer, a user or anybody, right, from the organization. Then we talk about, there we talk about several things like, the active search, background of the individuals, how satisfied was he, what are the kind of information sources he is. See, the information sources for a consumer product and an industrial product will vary, right. So, for example, if you were looking at a consumer product, you were talking about advertisements and these things, where you wanted to collect information about price, accessibility and these things or the brand and all these things about a consumer product. But in the industrial market, our information source are basically from the sales people, exhibitions, trade shows, direct mails, press releases, etc. Okay, and even word of mouth, right. So, then we talk about how the buying process will happen, where it is affected by product specific factors and company specific factors. And finally, how the decision is taken, whether it is a autonomous decision or a joint decision, and what is the choice of supplier. So, if it is a joint decision, maybe you will suffer through another issue, which I have already said, we had just initially had stated about conflict. So, if it is a joint decision, there will be a lot of people involved, so there might be a conflict. How do you deal with this conflict? But both of these points, whether it is autonomous or joint, they lead to the choice of a supplier or a brand. Okay. And then there are some situational factors also which do affect. So, we will understand this industrial buying behavior or B2B buying behavior model in more explicitly in the next slide, let us say. So, what it says is Seth model focuses on the complex relationships involved with joint decision making, right. Now, because why he says joint decision making, he emphasizes, because the simple reason is that in a firm, it is not one man who takes a decision, right. It is always a group of people who take a decision, and this group of people generally are referred to as the buying center, right, which I will tell you later on, which maybe I will explain. So, buying center, right. So, now the question here is, what kind of a complex relationship is involved in this decision making process? But interestingly, although this model looks complicated, it is not. Rather, the consumer buying behavior model is more complicated than the industrial buying behavior, right. Okay. But three things that are very important is the condition that drives you to the joint decision making. So, that makes it little difficult to understand, and the psychological world of the individuals involved, and the conflicts that will arise, no doubt when a lot of people are involved, obviously conflicts will arise, and how do you deal with these conflicts. So, when you are talking about a business to business organizational buying behavior, these points are very important to be considered. Let us go one by one. So, first let us start with the psychological world of the decision makers. Now, you see, in a organization, right, several people are involved. As we have seen, there is a manufacturing department, right. Then you have the quality control, people who are looking at the quality. There might be somebody who is using, right. The user is basically the manufacturer, right, manufacturing department. Then you might be having somebody who is a let us say agent, right, and then you might be having somebody who is basically the decider, so the finance department or somebody. So, a lot of people are involved, right. At least three departments are involved. One is the purchasing agent, the quality control, the engineers, and the manufacturing department, which is the users. Okay. At least these three people. These three means the three departments, not people. So, now irrespective of these three, there might be some more people also involved. For example, let us say the vice president finance. Now, he has his own expectation, right, or she has her own expectation. So, what kind of a psychological world are they coming from, Okay. Now, continuously they evaluate the suppliers and various brands to achieve their objectives. So, these people who are in this process, involved in this process of buying, now they will be continuously evaluating the suppliers, and who largely will be doing it? The person who is more affected. So, the or one who is largely involved in the decision making process, because you see every organization, in any organization if you go, certain departments will be more in power, right, which is we say organizational power has more power than other departments. It is not equal for all, right. So, in some departments maybe the purchasing department is very powerful, in certain departments the production department is very powerful, in certain other departments the finance department is very powerful. So, it depends on organization to organization. Okay. So, when you are talking about, let us say evaluating the suppliers to meet your expectations, right. So, we will look at two types of objectives. So, organizations have their own objectives to be met. So, what are they? Now, explicit objectives and implicit objectives. Now, when you talk about explicit objectives, something that can be very easily explained, very clear. So, what kind of a product quality I want, what is the delivery time I require, how much of supply I want, what kind of a after sales service I need. So, and what kind of a price I am looking into. So, these are some very clear objectives, but there can be some implicit objectives which are less explained, or these are which are more latent in nature, right. So, what is that? Now, for example, the reputation of the organization, the size of the organization that I am dealing with, the location of the where it is located, and what kind of relationship, buyer supplier relationship is involved in this, and what kind of technical expertise they have, how good their salesmen are, and even the lifestyle of these people, right. So, these are some implicit objectives. So, if I see that some organizations have very good sales team, and this team are coming regularly and updating the buyers and all, so maybe I will feel good about it, right. In general, it is found, generally it is found that the purchasing agents, they look for maximum price advantage, right. So, who are these people? Generally the people from finance and all. So, they look for maximum price advantage and economy in shipping and forwarding, right. Second, the quality control department are those people who will look for excellence in the quality, standardization of the product and engineering, high engineering, good engineering products, right. And the third are the manufacturing people department, who are generally the users of the product. Generally these are the people who work in the shop floor and they use these products. So, what do they look for? They look for immediate delivery, prompt delivery, proper installation and efficient service, right. For them these three are very important. Now, look at it, differences in the objectives and consequently expectations are often the root cause for constant conflict among these three type of individuals. So, this guy is looking at price, this guy is looking at quality, and this guy is looking at, let us say, delivery. So, delivery, quality and price. Now, if he looks at price and he says let us select somebody, a vendor who is providing us at the less cost, this guy may not be happy with the vendor, because he says that that particular vendor is not giving a good quality, and this guy, the manufacturing department, is not happy or happy because maybe the delivery is not right on time. So, because of these things there is always a clash, conflict going on, right. Now, the expectation of the decision makers about the suppliers and brands. For example, 5 points are there. For example, the background of the individuals, the information sources, the kind of active search that they do, and then the perceptual distortion that happens in their brain, and the satisfaction that they have from the past purchases. So, what I will do is, we will get into this expectation of this about the suppliers and brands in the industrial or the B2B organizational buying processes in the coming lecture. Now, but these 5 have a very large role to play on the expectation of the individuals, right. So, what I will do is, I will maybe wind up the lecture here, because we will be we are running short of time. So, I will wind up the lecture here and we will continue from here in the next lecture. But as I have told today, we have to understand that organizations the purchasing processes in the organization are more complicated and they involve a lot of people. So, the decision making process is generally joint in nature, sometimes it could be individual or autonomous in nature also, but largely it is a joint decision making process and there are a lot of people involved in this joint decision making process. So, obviously there is a chance of conflict and the question is how do organizations then handle this conflict, right. So, when I am talking about these things, I am talking about generally keeping in mind all kinds of organizations, B2B organizations, right. So, it is not necessary that I am only talking about high end or let us say B2B companies or high technology based companies. I am talking about any company, because every company needs to buy certain raw material from another company, right, or another firm in order to make some production or have some operation at their end. So, with this what I will do is I will wind up this lecture. So, thank you very much and have a nice time. So, we will meet in the next lecture. Thank you very much.